And speaking of storylines to watch, we are going to dive now into some of the top storylines from the World Series so far and what they may mean about these two teams. So I've got four that are actually in an article at 110sportsmedia.com right now. Four storylines on the World Series and that we from what we've seen in the first 5 games that can sort of explain why things are how they are right now and maybe give us some clues about how things could go the rest of the way or what's going to need to change for the Rays to win, that sort of thing as well. So I got 4 takeaways here, 4 storylines, I think is the better way to frame it. And we're going to start with the Dodgers starters. And I think this is another reason why, another reason why it helped to go through a little bit of a rundown of how this series played out, because in zooming out, you kind of have to also, you zoom out, you take a look at the big storylines, and then you sort of point to examples of them playing out that way. So the Dodgers' top starters have come up big. Clayton Kershaw has had his best postseason ever. He finished that best postseason ever. Now it's possible that he could come out of the bullpen in Game 7 if it gets to that point tomorrow. But this looks like his postseason is done, most likely. And it ends with 5 2/3 innings of 1-run ball in Game 5. He struck out 6 and pitched his way out of trouble, like we talked about, without his best stuff. The future Hall of Famer, there's been questions about his ability to pitch in the postseason, but look, he can do it. Yes, he's had some struggles in the postseason in the World Series, but he can absolutely pitch on the game's biggest stage, like we talked about before on Thursday's show. This is not some sort of roadblock for him, some sort of mental block. He can do it, and he's just showed that this postseason in this World Series. He has a 2-0 record, a 2.31 ERA, 14-3 strikeout to walk ratio in the World Series. In 5 postseason starts this year, a 2.93 ERA. He surpassed Justin Verlander for the most strikeouts ever in the postseason. He's at 207 now. And he won 2 games in the same postseason series for the first time in his career. Kershaw can pitch in the postseason. He can pitch on the game's biggest stage. Even when he wasn't at his absolute best in Game 5, he found a way to be productive and to deliver a quality outing. And of course, it hasn't just been him that's come up big for the Dodgers in the rotation. Walker Buehler is very quickly earning and solidifying a reputation as perhaps baseball's best big game pitcher. He entered the World Series with a 2.44 ERA in his postseason career. And then he absolutely dominated against the Rays in Game 3. He allowed just 3 hits, 1 run. He struck out 10. His Austin Barnes, his catcher for the game, said of him that might be the best I've ever seen his stuff. Buehler has struck out 39 batters in October. It's the most by a Dodger in any postseason ever. He joined Kershaw and Sandy Koufax as the only pitchers in franchise history with 10-plus strikeouts, 3 hits or fewer allowed in a World Series game. And we'll see him again in a potential Game 7 if the Rays should win tonight. Buehler and Kershaw together, a 2.04 ERA in the World Series. And Julio Urias, as we talked about, he impressed in Game 4, even though it ended with the Dodgers losing. It was very chaotic. A good start for him as well. So that's really the situation that the Dodgers are at from a starting pitching perspective. They've really only had one game where their starters' situation hasn't been great, and that was Game 2. Tony Gonsolin really just served as an opener. Just an inning and a third, and there was a pitching carousel for the Dodgers, and it did not really work out at all. It wasn't a complete disaster, but it just didn't work out. But that was really the only time when you're the Dodgers in this series where you look up after the game and say, our starter situation really did not work out. And so that's a big factor in the Dodgers holding a 3-2 series lead, and what easily could be them having won by now had that Game 4 gone differently. And what also makes that an important thing is its contrast to what we've seen from the Rays from their starting pitchers. The Rays starting pitchers, like we've talked about it, they've got an incredible group of pitchers, incredible bullpen, and you look at that, top three starters for them. Blake Snell, Tyler Glasnow, Charlie Morton, whatever order you want to put them in. Maybe you don't think any of them is Walker Buehler level, and I don't. I think he's on a different level. But when you have those three together, like that's a really quality trio of starters right there, even if not all of them have been complete studs the entire season. Rays starters at 3.77 ERA during the regular season. In the first 3 rounds of this postseason, Rays starters posted a 3.30 ERA. Of course, the caveat here, and in just the context, I should say, for this is that Kevin Cash, of course, has a very quick hook for his starters. He's not, most of the time, he's not letting them, go 6 innings and allow 5 runs. Like, it's just, those kind of starts just don't happen. Guys get pulled earlier. But through the first 3 rounds of this postseason for the Rays, their starters have been good overall. For the World Series, their starters' ERA is 7.89. 7.89. That is just not going to get the job done. Now, a lot of that bad number, that high ERA, is from Tyler Glasnow, who, if you just look at the strikeouts, he struck out 15 in 2 World Series starts, which is great, but he's had really shaky command, particularly of his curveball, and he doesn't have a third pitch, really, that he can throw with consistency, and so then all of a sudden the Dodgers were able to sit on his fastball as a result. He became the first pitcher ever with 6+ earned runs and 6+ walks in a World Series game, and that happened in Game 1. And then in Game 5 on Sunday, he threw 3 wild pitches, most for a pitcher in the World Series, and he gave up his 9th home run of the postseason, which is the most a pitcher has ever given up in a postseason. So that's been a huge part of their problems from a starting perspective. Two of their games have been started by Glasnow and have not worked out well. He did get through 5 innings on Sunday in Game 5, but the damage to some extent was already done. So Glasnow, he's a very talented pitcher, but not good command of his curveball. All of a sudden the Dodgers can just look fastball, sit on that fastball, clobber that fastball out of the park. And so that's a big reason for why their starter's ERA is 7.89 in the World Series. But he's not the only starter for the Rays that has struggled. Charlie Morton, who has been incredible in the postseason. We know how incredible we've talked about how incredible he can be. He's been in his career in Game 7s and winner-take-all games. But even just his most recent 8 postseason appearances heading into the World Series, a 1.45 ERA, 7-0 record. He's been outstanding in the postseason of late. And I say of late over the past most recent few years. But he was surprisingly hittable in Game 3. He coughed up 5 runs on 7 hits for his first playoff loss since October 2017. And Ryan Yarbrough got the start in Game 4, 2 earned runs and 5 hits and 1 strikeout in 3 1/3 innings. It was not great, but wasn't horrendous. The team eventually still won despite the bullpen giving up some runs too because of, like we talked about, the madness of Game 4. The lone bright spot for the Rays this World Series, has been Blake Snell, who took a no-hitter into the 5th inning in Game 2, struck out 9. He did allow a 2-run homer, but that was the only damage. That was the Rays' first win of the series to tie up the series at 1 game apiece. And Blake Snell, for the Rays, if you want to look on the bright side, of course, he's on the mound tonight. He's on the mound tonight for the Rays up against Tony Gonsolin. So if he can deliver again, then the Rays may be able to get that win to force a Game 7. So that's the good news for them, is that they do have their best starter of this World Series out there for Game 6. But really, I think the bigger point here in the storyline that I'm hitting on is that, look, there are a lot of ways to break down the World Series thus far. But one is simply that you look at the Rays in their 5 games, they've gotten really one good start. The Dodgers in their 5 games have only once not gotten a good start. Dodgers, 4 quality outings, 2 from Kershaw, 1 from Buehler, one from Urias. You look at the Rays, you got Snell, and then maybe Yarbrough is not horrible, but that's a big difference right there. I mean, all these things, these starts to the game, that sets the tone. Obviously, we had late inning chaos in Game 4, but a lot of the time it's all about setting the tone and keeping your opponent off the board early, and the Rays starters haven't been able to do that with only really one exception. And so that's a big factor in why you see the Dodgers leading 3-2, and had Game 4 not finished the way it had, it could have been Dodgers already having won the World Series. But that's neither here nor there at this point. But that's one trend that we're seeing. And of course, like I said, though, looking forward, it's Blake Snell on the mound tonight for the Rays. So they're going to need him, of course, like it goes without saying, they're going to need him to step up with another great outing. Now, fortunately, he's not necessarily in a position where, he was horrible his first time out in this World Series, and now he's got to, pull it together. But, I mean, he was great in Game 2, but in some sense, it doesn't really matter. You got to do it tonight. You got to show up. Like, who cares about the trends, whether he's been good or bad? He's going to have to show up tonight for the Rays to set the tone early the way that they want to. Next storyline I want to discuss here is the next two storylines all revolve around. I mean, the first two are really pitching related. It's hitting on the Dodgers and comparing that to the Rays, and then we're going to do the same for hitting. And with these next two storylines, Dave Roberts' club picked the perfect time to start firing on all cylinders offensively. 9 different Dodgers players have homered in the World Series. That's the most for any team in any postseason series ever. 9 Dodgers have homered in this World Series. The team has also hit double-digit home runs in 8 straight postseason games. No other team has ever come close to that in a single postseason ever in MLB history. So they got so many guys who can hit a home run, who can go deep at any point in the game, at any point in the lineup. And they're hitting enough home runs every game. They're going out there and they're getting 2 or plus every game. That's hard to compete with when you're the Rays. When you're the Rays offense, which we'll talk about, and they've done a good job in a couple of games with competing with that, but it's hard to compete against. But what really makes this Dodgers lineups even more talented than just, okay, all these guys can hit home runs and they're hitting home runs, is they also can score without it. In Game 1 of this series, the Dodgers scored 4 runs in the 5th inning to take a commanding lead that they would never give up, thanks to a walk, a double steal, a fielder's choice RBI groundout, and 3 RBI singles. I mean, that's not doubles, triples, home runs. It's none of it. I mean, we're talking walks, double steals, RBI groundouts, and RBI singles. In Game 3, they had in a 2-run 4th inning 3 singles, a safety squeeze, and a stolen base. Those are just 2 examples. We've seen this Dodgers team. All these players can hit home runs, but also they can manufacture runs. They can play small ball. They're stealing bases. Mookie Betts, even Corey Seager getting involved in stealing these bases. They can get the RBI ground out. They can just line the singles into center field. They can string together hits, and they can do the little things as well. They're getting all these 2-out hits. That's been one of the big storylines of the postseason for them and the World Series for them, is how many hits they're getting, how many runs they're scoring with 2 outs. And it's quite remarkable. They're on pace for the highest percentage of runs scored coming with 2 outs in a single postseason ever. I mean, that's something that, I don't know how much stock you put into weighing the factor of it being with 2 outs. But regardless, offense is incredible, and it's so well-rounded that it's hard to compete against. Now, as for specific players for the Dodgers, Corey Seager has been the offensive MVP of the World Series thus far, and he could very well end up being the World Series MVP should the Dodgers win. The shortstop hitting .471 in this series, 2 homers, 4 RBI, 5 walks, 7 runs scored. He trails only Randy Arozarena, who we'll talk about in a minute, in home runs in a single postseason. And he trails only David Freese in 2011 for RBI in a single postseason. He has 19 runs batted in the 2020 playoffs. Also making a huge impact offensively for the Dodgers is Justin Turner, the third baseman. He's hitting .364 in the series. He hit first inning home runs in back-to-back games. Max Muncy has a .522 on-base percentage in this series. He has 6 RBI to lead the Dodgers in the World Series. And of course, you have Jock Peterson, Betts, Barnes, Taylor, Bellinger, Will Smith. They've all homered. I mean, everybody's getting involved, of course. Those are some of the players who are making the biggest impact. But it's hard from the Rays' perspective. You can't take it easy for anybody. Even the backup catcher can take you deep at any point. Now, to contrast this to the Rays situation, Randy Arozarena, we're going to talk about him here in a second. He's continued his just historic postseason, and he's gotten just enough help to make things interesting. He's gotten just enough offensive help to make things interesting, but it hasn't been the Rays finding a new gear offensively and all of a sudden, with the exception of Game 4, they haven't really found this new gear and gotten everybody going, and 3, 4, or 5 players are hot now. We're still talking about just a couple players doing most of the heavy lifting, but there's been just enough contributions alongside Arozarena keeping things up that the Rays have been able to take a couple of games. So let's start with Arozarena, and the first thing, yes, we should note, this is an expanded postseason format for him, so he's had more opportunities to pick up hits, to get home runs, to get these records. So we're not talking about, regular season. We're talking about, 162 games, and not every player plays that many, of course. But you're talking about a set sample size. But with postseason, with it being expanded this year and teams going different lengths and requiring different numbers of games to win the World Series or get eliminated, whatever it might be, there's some inconsistencies here. But this one thing is very clear, is that Randy Arozarena is in the midst of one of the best postseasons we've ever seen for a player in MLB history. The 25-year-old outfielder now has 9 home runs this postseason and 27 hits this postseason. Both of those are records for an MLB player ever in a single postseason. No MLB player has ever had as many hits, has ever had as many home runs in a single postseason as Randy Arozarena has in the 2020 playoffs. It's truly remarkable. This is a guy who's just stayed locked in. I really thought, okay, this has been incredible. It's a great story. Maybe he was even a breakout star next year in the regular season, but he's not going to be able to keep this up in the World Series, and he's continuing to make a huge offensive impact because he's so locked in, and he has the ability to hit the ball to all fields. He's not trapped in he needs this specific pitch in this specific location to hit it this specific direction. He's hitting the ball to all fields. He's just mashing. There's not a lot else to say for him other than just, wow, every time he does something incredible, and every time he steps up to the plate, you gotta watch, because it could be something else historic. But coming into the World Series, and we talked about this, I believe, last week, we knew that the Rays were going to need some significant offensive contributions from guys outside of Arozarena. And they haven't gotten those contributions with a great deal of consistency, but there have been some players who stepped up in individual games. In Game 2, it was Brandon Lowe with 2 home runs. He had been slumping as he helped them get the win in Blake Snell's great start. And then in Game 4, Brett Phillips, who was a .202 career hitter in the majors, he delivered the RBI single that ultimately resulted in the Rays winning and a walk-off in just absurd fashion like we talked about. And Kevin Kiermaier, the center fielder, has also been really good in the World Series. 2 home runs, .375 batting average. But Lowe, as one example, he hasn't had a single hit outside of his home runs this World Series. And it's clear that the Rays have several guys who are capable of big moments. They had 14 total runs in their 2 wins, that's impressive, right? We kind of thought that maybe if the Rays are winning World Series games, it's because the Dodgers offense, fell quiet one night and they get a win 4-3. But no, they have 14 total runs scored in their 2 wins. But they're going to need the exact right combination of timely hitting, better pitching than we've seen from them overall in this series if they're going to get 2 straight wins here. It's not something that's really probable. It's not something that you would predict, that most people would predict. Just looking at the odds, looking at the stats, looking at the numbers, looking at these teams. but it's certainly far from impossible. This series is absolutely not over. I mean, 2 wins in a row, and all of a sudden the Rays have the World Series title. This is a really resilient team. Blake Snell is on the mound for them tonight. A lot could happen. Tony Gonsolin has struggled this postseason. The Rays could knock him out early. Snell could be very good again. All of a sudden, it's Game 7. You've got Charlie Morton, Walker Buehler. Anything can happen. Series is absolutely, positively still very much up for grabs. You're not comfortable in the slightest if you're the Dodgers. You cannot afford to be comfortable. You cannot afford to be even optimistic. You just have to go out and win Game 6. That's your goal right now. And the Rays, you know what you got to do. You're going to have to win 2 straight. I mean, it's obvious thinking, it's obvious dialogue. I'm not saying anything revolutionary here, but those have been some of the key storylines of this series so far. Starting pitching, Dodgers has been generally great from their top guys. Rays have gotten a great start from Snell in Game 2, but otherwise their great starters have let them down. The Dodgers are scoring in so many ways, up and down the lineup, contributions, home runs, small ball, you name it. Arozarena has kept it up. There's been some big games from other guys, and that's been enough to keep things interesting. And keeping things interesting, I say keeping things interesting. What I really mean is keeping the Rays in this series. And they're in this series, and any team can win 2 games in a row against any other team in Major League Baseball. So I shouldn't even say maybe keeping it interesting is probably not even the right phrasing. They've gotten enough offensive contributions from guys to stay in this series, to make this a series, a really good World Series. Now it's just a matter of what we see in Game 6 and a potential Game 7, and I can't predict that, but I mean, it's hard for me to, I can't, say I know what's going to happen. I mean, baseball is a sport where in any given game, your star can go for 5 with 5 strikeouts, and your nobody last man on the bench could hit 2 home runs. But those storylines so far kind of indicate what we're going to need to see from the Rays if they're going to come back, and what we're going to need to see from the Dodgers if they're going to close this thing out.